Welcome back to the Writer's Room for Run Radio. My name's Trina Wilcox, and our guest today is Mick Smith. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. You reached out and you've got quite a resume. You're working on a book. You call yourself the Doctor of Digital. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, this started because I had been in education for a long time. So, executive region director, campus dean, things like that, a professor, all those sorts of things. But then I moved into some other areas as well that could be academic in some ways, but really a different field. So, I got into the writing, publishing, screenplay, and other things like that. But such a started a podcast with the Doctor of Digital, given the fact that I had an academic background, but then I also wanted to have some expertise and moved into some other areas as well.
Okay, I see. So was it hard for you to make the switch to doing much writing, or was that kind of just second nature for you?
It's a different type of writing. And see, that's what I thought was really interesting. So the way I would say it is that as an academic, obviously I know what a subject and a verb is, and I know all those things, but in academic writing, most of it is very different than when you're writing for a general public because it's more select. So in other words, an academic or a scholar would be reading what you have written because they're interested in that subject or that topic, and they're paid to do so. So what's different about writing for a general audience is that you're not paying them. In fact, you've got to keep them interested,
Yes.
and they have to be involved in the subject. So it was really a different type of writing. I, in fact, published about 78 publications academically, but then when it came to a novel and then now adapting it as a screenplay, that's a newer foray for me. So it's a new endeavor, and it's a different type of writing because in the academic field, you are really appealing to people who want to read and they're very interested in what you're saying. So it's sort of a captive audience, I guess, as
Mhm.
opposed to a person who's reading a novel or wants to see a movie because they're paying for it and they want to be entertained or they want to get something out of it. So it's a little different type of writing.
Okay. How was that process different for you?
I think what I did was to research it. I did it what most academics do. If you're interested in the subject, you research it. So when I started the idea of the novel, I said, well, what would I have done if I was interested in teaching a new class or in a new area academically? So I did whatever I did there. So got a bunch of books, read a lot, and then developed all those things that were based on what the experts were saying. So when it came to novel writing, how do you develop characters? How do you plot out a story? How do you keep people interested? How do you write dialogue? All of those kinds of things. So I got about a dozen, 15 different books on how to write. And that way it was giving me some idea because I was coming into it as a newbie and saying, well, I want to try to have a different style of writing as opposed to the academic writing, which I had done for quite a long time, for decades, actually.
It seems like it could be daunting. I mean, that's a lot to take on, and you're flooding yourself with new information. How did you keep it organized, or was it more of just let me absorb all the information, then I'll figure it out?
I had what I thought was an interesting way of going about it because I had seen the novel the entire time while writing it in a very visual fashion. So at the time, I was living outside of suburban Philadelphia and I had a very small study, but it was a great place. It had all my favorite books and a desk and what have you. And my daughter's computer was right next to me. So it was a very good workspace. But I saw this visually, and on one wall that I was writing in front of, I had put up a big, basically a poster, and I plotted out the story. So here is the beginning, here are the events, the conflict points, and the important points within the story, and then coming to the climax, the denouement. But I was watching it visually in a way, but I was trying to get the ideas out of my head onto the computer, but seeing it visually and plotting it out that way. And I think by doing it that way, it made more sense to me because I wasn't losing the forest through the trees. I could see the entire picture as well as working on the specific parts that I was doing at that time when it came to dialogue and plot development and what have you.
So, do you think you'll use that same process again, or will you tweak it?
I think it worked for me. So, I mean, if it came to other people, I'm not sure what works for them, but I knew it worked for me because I saw it and the entire time. And this is one thing I did see academically. So, for example, when you write a dissertation, which took me several years, as a matter of fact, I mean, it takes about 4 or 5 years. It's a very long process. It's a big book, it's very complex. But I saw that the writing process is very similar in that I simply got an insight at one point. So the definition of a dissertation is a unique contribution to scholarship. So I had to think about it when I was writing a dissertation, which wasn't visual, but it was something that was insightful. And the idea just popped in my head one day. And it was sort of a aha moment, like, oh, that's it. That's the insight. Except then it takes you about 4 or 5 years to do the subsequent academic work, which is the languages and all the other books that you have to read in order to put together a large, complex project like that. When it came to the novel, it still was basically the same in that it was, I had that aha moment that here's the insight. This is really what I want to talk about. But then, excuse me, I could see it visually, and I put it up in a basically a poster form in front of me and wrote towards that.
What kind of obstacles did you have to deal with? Did you have the classic writer's block, or did other things come up that you didn't expect?
I think I might be unusual in this because when people talk about a writer's block, I mean, I know I have a real passion for getting my ideas out. So when it came to block, it's a very difficult concept for me to understand in that I would never start a project and I would never want to take something on unless I really had that insight and unless I really felt passionate about it. So for me, it was just a more of a practical, like how much time do I have? What do I need to accomplish? And I broke it down into small tasks in order to get to the larger project. So when I talk to other people, I know this is a very common idea that they run into, but I say, well, if you use some writer prompts and get you into that practice of writing. So a great title of a book I came across after I'd written my dissertation, I think it's really phenomenal. It says, How to Write a Dissertation 15 Minutes a Day. And I love that title because what it's saying in my mind is similar idea. Break up what you're doing into small components, because if you're starting to think, let's say a writer wants to write a trilogy or they want to write some huge work, it's so large, it gets daunting. And that's where a person would say, I mean, I just don't know if I can do it. Well, you can if you break it down into some smaller components and you work on what I'm saying, basically that 15 minutes a day, but a good 15 minutes. Make sure those words really have impact. Those are the words that you really want. Those are the ideas you're trying to get across. And that way, this large project that seems overwhelming is not so overwhelming because you're really trying to narrow it down and get what needs to be done for that particular time.
Tell me about your publishing process. Has it been very different from writing for, your scholarly writings versus your novel, or has it just been similar?
I thought it was different in one sense, in that I think people outside of academia are kinder and gentler, and
Ah,
inside academia are often not so nice. So there's a famous quote by Henry Kissinger. He said that the reason that academic battles are so vicious is because the stakes are so small. And there's an element of truth to that, because what you find in academic work is that they're really splitting hairs on so many things, the meanings of words or an academic theory that they're wedded to. And so in a lot of ways, academics really go at each other, but it's an internal battle, and it's an internal battle between a small group of people. And that's why it's so bitter. It's kind of like a family, right? If the family's not getting along, you really should get along because you're in the same family, but you're so close to them and you know what their weaknesses and strengths are. On the other hand, the publication process, when I was looking for a publisher, I said, these are people who are more supportive and also we're looking forward to having a good story. So in that ways, I think it was different, and I think they're more positive. I think they're more upbeat. I think they like the ideas of having a story, and I think they're more encouraging in that respect. So that's why I'd always encourage people. If you had a story, get out there and put it out there, because people are there and there are publishers who want to publish what you have.
so did you go the traditional route for your novel?
I started initially, and that's what I found that was so difficult. In fact, with my story, I had sat on it for a long, long time. So I basically wrote this in maybe around 2000 or so, right after 2000, 2001, 2003. Look for traditional publishers. And I found that it was so difficult because a lot of them simply don't answer and you don't hear from them. Or then you have to take a strategic decision. Do you want to go to try to get an agent in order to get a publisher? And there was to me, it was just a convoluted process. But the one thing that kept me going at that time, and that's why I never abandoned the story, said, I'm going to publish this someday. In that, one person wrote back who was a traditional publisher and said, well, we're not going to publish this. However, this reads so realistically it reads as though this actually happened. And I said, well, that's what I was going for. That's what I wanted. Now, I didn't understand why wouldn't you publish it then?
Right.
Because
What a
that's,
compliment.
yeah, that was a compliment. But, what you find is that a lot of times just simply the publishing house. I mean, if anybody wants to go that route, I'd say do a lot of research and find out, because not every publisher is the right place for you. You have to find the right publisher for the right type of work, whether it's horror, novel, drama, what have you. So you have to find the appropriate audience. And a lot of times they're just not the right publisher. So you have a good product and you have something which is quality, but you just don't have the right publisher. It's got to be a match. And that's where I think after sitting on it for a long time, I had a much better idea of that. And I found a publisher I was very happy with. And so the rest is history, I guess.
Okay. So you did get a traditional publisher eventually for this particular novel you speak
I
of.
got up what is independent publisher. So somebody
Okay.
who's in
Okay.
the middle, somebody in the
Okay.
middle. That's what I was looking for, because I found that at the time, see, when I was writing this, say 2001, 2002, you could publish on Amazon, you could self-publish, but it was
Mhm.
really just starting at that time. And I said, well, that's not quite what I was looking for. That's a little bit unsophisticated. I couldn't find a traditional publisher. So I said, what I'm looking for is someone sort of in the middle. And that's what I found. And so since then, I've been very happy with that individual and that
Now,
publisher.
would that count as the hybrid? I've heard people speak of hybrid. Is that
I I think that's probably it.
okay?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
they
I'm
they
hoping audiences will understand that they do have options and that it's not just your book's no good or your writing's no good if you
correct.
haven't been picked up. Like you're saying, there's a good fit, and if it's not a fit, doesn't mean stop. It means find a different way.
Absolutely. That's what I agree with 110%. And that's what I would like people to hear and understand, that it's not that the publishing that you're doing is not good. And so don't be discouraged. It's really a match and you've got to find the right person. And that's what I found. So I found this guy and I said, initial conversation, I said, pretty much, I don't really want to revise a whole lot. I don't want to change a whole lot. And a lot of traditional publishers, see, that's what they will do. They will publish it, but they're going to say, all right, now we want massive revisions and we want this changed and that changed. And so for a lot of people, that's not a very pleasant experience. And so when I told this person, I was originally, from the first conversation, I really liked him. And he said, no, I mean, we're going to publish what you want. We're going to give you the feedback in terms of formatting. We'll give you some assistance. And he did. He worked on transitions and things like that I probably just didn't catch, and it improved the work, but it was sort of that hybrid publisher. So that's what I think. I think a person's got to find, it's a match. That's what I would come down to saying. You got to find the right match for your particular project.
That's fantastic. Well, then tell us about the book. Tell us what it's about, where we can go to find it. If you have an excerpt you want to read, go for it.
Oh, well, if it's an excerpt, I'll tell you what, I'll read the back cover blurb, because that's
Let's
the
do it.
best.
Okay.
That's the best way to hear what the story is. So Paul Theus is a respectable middle-class professor until his peaceful world is shattered. As we find out from the first line, no parent prepares for a child to be taken. Beware of strangers and watch out for the big bad wolf, kids are told. But what if a family unit is smoldered from within by a mother? Paul found the note that his wife was leaving for a while tucked in a book about the John Bonet Ramsey child murder. The Bohemian mother Anne Theus inflames the threat posed by the idea that it takes the village court to raise a child. Do the courts really act in the best interest of the children? Parents plan for their children's home, school, clothes, food, and happiness. But once the Theus's 5-year-old daughter is kidnapped, we are barraged by conflict for over 3 years until the terminal end. Is the terminal ending tragic or the only possible resolution to the conflict? You decide. So hopefully that's intriguing enough. And the title is Burning America in the Best Interest of the Children, and it's got a question mark. So I'm taking on what people are calling the family court or the custody situation in the courts.
When I read a little bit about that, I did a question. Wait, is this real? Well, it is very realistic sounding. So I imagine it doing well with everyone's interest in crime and all that stuff right now. So very, very exciting for you.
Yeah, and hopefully that's what it is. I appreciate the kind words, because that's what I was going for. I wanted to have something which intrigued people, and I think when you hear a story about that or something like that, that it would pull people in, and it's got enough elements in there that's a little bit of what's going on here and what happens, and I hope that's the hook. So, and I said, in contrast to academic writing, where people are pretty much forced to take what you're saying and read it, here, I think there's enough elements in it to hook people in. So, to answer the question where it's available, I do have a website. So, it's burning-america.com. So, if Aunt Murgatroyd's birthday is coming up, I will personalize it and write it to her and sign it and date it and people like that. But it's also readily available in some other places too. So Amazon is carrying it, Barnes and Noble, Walmart, and Target also have it. So it has pretty good distribution as well. You can find it in a lot of places.
Very nice. Do you plan on writing a series based on this, or will your next book be a completely different topic?
There's a number of directions that I'm going at. So what I'm doing currently with this is I'm actually taking the novel and adapting it as a screenplay. So I'm working on a screenplay version, and that goes back to even what I was saying. It's visual, and I think then when it comes down to a screenplay, well, obviously it is visual, as they tell you the difference between a novel and a screenplay is to show, don't tell, because you can't write as much for a screenplay. In fact, I start seeing just the simple page numbers. Now, the novel is something like 229 pages, and a screenplay is really about 90 pages. So right from there, well, half the book is gone, you know? So you're trying to take it and scrunch it into something by showing rather than talking or writing words. So screenplay is next. I have another couple books that I'm thinking about on some other topics, but some have said even this might lend itself to a sequel. So I'm not sure about that, but another number of projects, a number of directions to go into.
That's exciting. That's got to feel pretty good.
I think so. I think it's I said I'm gonna say arrogantly, but I thought, well, it's a good story. So
Confidently. Yeah, you believe in your
good.
story. Nothing wrong with that. Well, hopefully you will come back when you have the next piece to share. I'd love to hear more about it. I'd love to talk about the screenwriting process, adapting that, because that's something I'm completely ignorant on. So I'm sure a lot of our audience has similar desires to adapt or even just start writing a screenplay. So if you want to share that, please come back.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. So I appreciate it. It's been fun and I'd love to help people. That's kind of what I do. I think everybody says that they have a story or they're at least thought about it. So one of the things I always tell people, I said it's the biblical phrase, a voice crying out in the wilderness. Absolutely. You probably have a story and you might want to work with somebody in order to get it out. And I'd love to help people and offer them advice and assist.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mick Smith. Appreciate your time.
Thank you much. It was fun. Thanks.
Thank you.